Welcome to the Milsurf Mike channel. This is a rifle that will soon either no longer be in my possession, if not out of my possession by the time I release this video, as I've gone to mainly Russian AKs over the last year. And the Missouri Valley Collector Show is coming up, and this is a piece in my collection that is expendable, as I'd like to have a decent amount of cash to pick up something really cool there. It isn't because I dislike the MAK-90. As a matter of fact, I had a blast shooting it, but it is frankly redundant with other AKs in my collection that aren't affected by George H.W. Bush's import ban. The MAK-90 stands for Modified AK-1990 and is based on the Chinese Type 56 AK. China was an early adapter to the AK-47, and the initial Type 56 rifles were based off the Russian Type 3, which had a milled receiver. Russia would come out with the AKM with a stamped receiver in 1959, and the Chinese Type 56 would also have stamped receivers by the mid-1960s. Some differences between the Type 56 and the Russian AK-47 and later AKM. The Type 56 would be the only AK variant to have a folding attached spike bayonet. The Type 56 stamped receiver would be made from 1.5mm stamping, while the AKM was made from 1mm stamping. The Type 56 has a fully enclosed front sight, while the AKMs are pretty open. The Type 56 is blued, while the AKM was either black oxide or parkerized, and there are some small wood furniture and sight differences. China would eventually export more AKs than the Russians, and most AKs used against American forces in Vietnam were Chinese. Some different variations would be the original Type 56, which is more or less an original AK or AKM copy, the Type 56-1, which had an underfolder stock, the Type 56-2, which had a side-folding stock, the short-barreled Type 56C, the Type 56S, or Sporter, which had only semi-auto mode, and the Type 84, which is chambered in 5.56x45. Originally produced at State Factory 66, production of the Type 56 was moved to state-owned Defense Corporation, China North Industries Group Corporation Limited, officially abbreviated as Norinco in 1980. By the 1980s, China was exporting the Type 56S to the United States civilian market, where it became as popular as the Wasser is today. The downfall of importation of Chinese AKs in the U.S. began on January 17, 1989, when Patrick Purdy lit his van on fire with a Molotov cocktail and began firing his Type 56S at Cleveland Elementary School in Stockton, California, killing 5 children and wounding 30 others before ending his own life with a Taurus PT-92. Not letting a tragedy go to waste, anti-2A groups led a well-funded and targeted campaign. They received a huge boost from former President Reagan when he said that an AK-47 was not a sporting rifle, and President George H.W. Bush's ATF instituted a temporary import ban on quote-unquote non-sporting rifles. Colt suspended making AR-15s, driving prices for semi-auto rifles through the roof. After a quote-unquote cooling-off period, Bush made the import ban permanent in July 1989. This is also around the time that gun owners Vidkin Quisling, Bill Ruger, started crafting proposed legislation to limit magazine capacity in an attempt to save the mini rifles at the expense of everyone else. A story I went much deeper into in my 4 times gun makers betrayed the Second Amendment video I released on April 4, 2021. Getting back to the ban at hand. The Sporting Purposes Clause mainly dealt with cosmetics, so importers were able to get around much of the ban by changing a few things and limiting their magazine capacities. Getting back to the Type 56S, this is where we get the MAK-90. As stated earlier, this stands for Modified AK-1990 and was cosmetically altered to meet the Sporting Purposes Clause. No more folding stocks, pistol grips, or bayonets. A thumbhole stock replaced the original stock and pistol grip, which would give it the same functionality. No bayonet or bayonet lug, and the threaded barrels weren't allowed. They would be sold with 5-round magazines. The first MAK-90s would have the original model name ground off with MAK-90 Sporter stamped over. Receivers produced specifically for MAK-90s, when those ran out, would say the same, just no grounding of the previous model. Models imported after 1990 would have the last 2 digits of the year added to the front of the serial number so you can tell when yours was made. Mine was made in 1994, the last year of importation. George Bush lost his re-election campaign in 1992 to Bill Clinton, where Ross Perot picked up nearly 20% of the vote. While there are numerous reasons for Republicans to vote for Perot in droves, likely the biggest thing they held against Bush was his betrayal of gun owners. This would play out again 2 years later after the American people overwhelmingly kicked the Democrats out of the House and Senate after passing the quote-unquote assault weapons ban that was signed into law by Bill Clinton. While the effects of the law amounted to cosmetic features and magazine capacity, thanks to Bill Ruger, most gun makers were able to produce rifles that were functionally the same as those prior to them. Unfortunately for the MAK-90, all Norinco and Polytac Kalashnikov rifles were one of the categories that were specifically named to be banned. There were thousands of MAK-90s already sitting in warehouses, and they were allowed to be sold with the receivers cut up. Century Arms ended up buying these and pairing them with Mahdi receivers from Egypt, and these would be the Miser 90 rifles. Although the assault weapons ban was sunset in 2004, all Norinco arms and ammo were banned from importation thanks to George W. Bush's sanctions against the company in 2003 for suspected arms sales to Iran. My rifle. I own or have owned several AKs now, and the MAK-90 would be above the middle of the pack. It is a step below the Arsenal or the Saiga, but better than the Wasser and Waffenwerks in my humble opinion. While some people don't like the thumbhole stock, I don't mind it and had said that if I kept the rifle, I would keep it in MAK-90 configuration just because even though gun control is shitty history, it is still history. Shooting it is like shooting any decent AK, although I do think the trigger is better than the Tapco triggers on my Saigas. If you're only getting one AK, Chinese really isn't a bad choice, even if you leave it in MAK-90 configuration. Please be aware of where your elected officials and the groups that claim to represent you stand on the Constitution. Please join the GOA, the premier no-compromise 2A group, and get $5 off my link in the description. And no, I don't get a kickback. If you like my content, please check out my other videos, like, share, and subscribe. Engagement really helps the algorithm. Also, please check out my Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Parler, and who I support on Patreon. Thank you for watching, and as always, have a great day.